Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Metzia daf and Dali. This week's learning is dedicated for the refuah shlema of Pesha Etabat Sarah, who is undergoing surgery this week. This week's learning is sponsored by Audrey Mandro in loving memory of her mother, Bessie Nani Muska. Basha Leah Batsiv Yachana Rabbi Yehuda, a kind and devoted wife, daughter, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. She always embraced family and was so proud of all my learning. She exemplified good midah by just being herself. May her neshama have an aliyah. This week's learning is sponsored by Rona Fink. With gratitude to Hashem, we welcome our first grandson, Ezra Leib, born on the first day of Pesach, to our son and daughter-in-law, Daniel Fink and Abby Marks. Ezra Leib grew up to be a helper with an open and warm heart and a blessing to the Jewish people. Mazal tov. We're going to get started. I'll remind everyone this is our last Zoom for the week, and then we'll start up again next Sunday on Zoom. All the classes will upload as usual. They'll go up a little bit earlier, and by 5 in the morning Israel time. And if anyone is in Manhattan on Wednesday night, you can join us at the Shiur. Details, you can always just email us if you want to know details. Okay, we're going to get started at the beginning of our daf. First, we're just going to talk about a somewhat unrelated topic, but because we talked about all these cases where somebody gives money to somebody to buy for them stuff, so now we're going to have some sort of case, and then we're going to move back to our basic issues we've been discussing. So I'm a Rava, starting at the top of our daf. Hane Beit Lata. I will prepare you that the beginning of this daf is actually fairly straightforward. The second part of the daf is actually a little bit more complicated. So Hane Beit Lata Diave Zuze Lechad Lemizman Lehumit. 3 people give this person money to buy them the same item. Okay, 3 people want a phone. They give me money to buy a phone for them. But all I bought was 1 phone. I didn't take all the money. I just took some of the money and I bought 1 phone with it. Zavan Lakulu. I bought for all of them, meaning they're all 3 equally, they all have equal rights to the phone. The phone basically is a third owned by each one. So now, why exactly is this? So the Gemara is going to clarify a little bit the statement of Rava. This was only if when I received the money, I didn't package each one separately and put each one in a separate Ziploc bag or something. But in other words, if I kept their money separate and I went to the store with one of the bags of money and brought it and bought a phone with it, that clearly belongs to whoever the owner of that money was. But if I put all their money together and it got all mixed up, and the coins that I got from all those people are now mixed up, and I bought it with a third of that money, well, then it's not clear whose money it is. Even if I say, and when I went to the store, I'm buying this for so-and-so, it doesn't really matter because I used money that was kind of equally belonging to all 3 people, and therefore no one has more rights to it than anybody else. Okay, so like I said, this isn't really related to our topic, but it is somebody taking money from someone else to go buy something. And in this case, money from a bunch of people and clarifying whose money is it. Amar Papi Mishmei Rabba. Hi situmta kanya. So situmta is kone. Lamai hilchata. So I'm going to specifically not yet explain what situmta is. We'll get there in a minute. If you do a situmta, that's the deal is done. So they say, for what? And what does that mean? It's done, completely done? Well, Rav Chaviva Amar Lemikne, right? Situmta is not one of the list of the kinyanim that we learned in the past. So Rav Chaviva says Lemikne mamash. It means to fully acquire. Really, this works like a real kinyan. Rabbanit Amre lekibule ale mishapara. We're going to go back to this mishapara. If you remember, mishapara is a curse, right? That if you renege on a deal, God will punish you, right? Because I'm not going to get into the whole wording of the curse, but it's basically, right, whoever punish those people, the Dora Mabul and the Dora Flaga and all that will punish you. So Rabbanan say this situmta is not really a kinyan, but it's enough of a statement that you're serious about this deal that if you renege, you get a curse. So what is situmta? Good question. Machloka between the Mefarshim. So Rashi says it's this kind of seal that the storekeepers will put when it was sold, like kind of a sign. You ever go into a store and there's an item that says on it's sold and you can't buy it because it's already sold to someone. So if the owner puts on sold, that's already as if the deal is done. And that is the situmta we're talking about. You can see why this isn't actually really a kinyan. It's a little bit weird that Rav Chaviva will call this a kinyan. And that's why the Rosh quotes Rabbeinu Hananel, who basically says, no, we're talking here about a handshake, okay? Or something that's like a handshake. The Rosh even goes so far as to say, whatever's common in those days to be considered a handshake, right? There's different things in different communities and different cultures where there's a certain way of saying this deal is a done deal. If you shake hands or if you do something else, that's an indicator that we're serious. And that can even count as a kinyan according to Rav Chaviva, or according to the rabbis, no, it just means you can't really renege at that point. And if you do, you'll get cursed. Again, that's just rabbinic, not by Torah law, the curse. The hilchatan, the halacha is the kibule ale mishapara, which sounds, reasonable, that it's not really a kinyan by Torah law. It's just that the rabbis will say you get cursed if you renege. But the atra the nehige lemikne mamash kane. Again, you see how much this is dependent on the custom of the land. If you live in a place where they view this as a real kinyan, this is, again, interesting. Even though Jewish law says this is a kinyan, the minhag hamakom can override that. And basically, this is viewed as if it's a kinyan. And therefore, it's more than a misha para. You really can't renege at all. Now we're going to go back to the Mishnah. So if you remember in the Mishnah, they talked about it. Again, I want to review this whole concept, which you've seen a few times, but it's always good to review. Because if you're going to get out of this chapter without all the details, there are some certain basics we should get out of it. So one of them is this whole idea of poskim ala payroll. I want to pay for something upfront. So if I want to link into this price, I'm supposed to be gaining from this, right? So what do I gain? So I gain from this that if the price goes up, I'm going to get more. But isn't that rebate? How can we do this, right? Because then I give you money, time passes, you keep the money for a while, and in exchange, you give me a higher price. That's if it goes up, right? We're going to get back to, in the Mishna, we're talking about the case, what if it goes down and I lose? We'll get back to that later. But if it goes up, theoretically, this is going to work under what circumstances? Now, there's only certain circumstances where it works, because otherwise it really is rebate. I gave you money, you kept my money for a while, you gave it back to me with more. So the ways that the main way this works, and then that's going to already branch out though, but the main way it's going to work is if you have that produce already in your house. So if I buy grains of wheat from you and you have wheat in your house, that's what we call yeshlo, you have. Now, when I buy it from you, you don't give me the wheat right now, but you happen to have it in your house. If you have in your house, it's as if, again, it's all theoretical, but that's okay. We have theoretical things all the time in Jewish law. It's as if you gave me them right then and there. And therefore, there's no issue of you keeping my money for a long time and only giving me something later because you potentially could have given it to me right then because you had it right then. Which we then extended to say, even if ain lo, even if you don't have it, well, if it's something so easily found in the shuk, right? Which means that you can easily find it in the shuk for that price right then. When would that be? If yetza hashal, if there's already a set price in the market. Even if it goes up later, the fact that there's a set price now means that since the price is set in the shuk and it's easy for you to get it, once I give you the money, it's as if you already have it, even though you don't have grains in your house. But you could go to the shuk tomorrow, buy grains for that price because the price is set. And you won't have a problem that tomorrow it's going to go up. Now, 6 months later, it might go up. But since right now, you could go to the shuk with the money, buy it. It's as if you have it. That's what we learned so far. The Mishna then said, what if I'm not buying the grains and the grains are in the shuk, but I'm buying, or the grains are in your house. Now we're up to the part where really yesh, so you have it in your house. What if I'm buying flour or wine or olive oil or all these kind of things we talked about, a pot, and you have it, but you don't have flour. You have the raw materials. You have the grains to make flour and it's in a pile, but you haven't yet turned it into flour. So the Mishna says that's also fine. But now we're going to see Machlokes Rav and Shmuel about this, and then we're going to have to fit it into the Mishnah because it doesn't really seem to match. This we're going to learn all about the processes of making wine, of making oil, of making flour, etc. Amar Rav, mechusal shtayim posek, shalosh eno posek. Rav says it has to be missing only 2 actions. If you're missing 3 actions that you have to do to that wheat to get it into flour, okay, the grains to get it, then it doesn't work. That's too far removed. 3 actions. Shmuel amar bidei adam afilu mea posek. If it's all in your hands to do, then you can, even 100 actions. You could need to do is obviously exaggerating. There are not 100 actions that would take to get items ready for use. But let's say you had to go through 100 processes, that would be fine as long as it's in your control. So again, it's as if you have it because it's in your control to do. But bidei shamayim afilu achat eno posek. Okay, so the main example of bidei shamayim we're going to see later is the winnowing. The winnowing, you throw it up in the air, and the wind, you take the grains after you've separated the wheat from the chaff on the threshing floor, you throw it up in the air, and the wind blows the chaff, and you're left with a pile of grains. So that needs, although in the end we're going to see that's not bidei shamayim. So I don't know what else Shmuel would consider bidei shamayim, but he says bidei shamayim even 1 is no good because it's not in your control. Let's say there's no wind. You won't be able to do it. Some people say we're talking about something that you would need an atypical wind to do it. Okay, in the end, we're going to say winnowing isn't a good example. I'll already tell you the end, which is there are other ways to do it. You don't need to do it by throwing it up in the air and having the wind blow it. You could actually do it by yourself with a sieve. So it's not the best answer. But he obviously has other things in mind that could be, that are only able to be done bidei shamayim. So Tanam, now we're going to start questioning these opinions from the cases in the Mishnah, which seem to either have more than three or more than two, or seem to have needing God's intervention. So let's see. Remember, all the cases in the Mishnah work. So if they need more than three actions, that's going to be a problem with Rav. If they need God to, some action in the hands of God to intervene, then it's going to be a problem with Shmuel. So there's three things that have to happen with this pile, not two. What has to happen? Well, it first has to be left out in the sun to dry, because you can't, right? They're moist still, they have to dry. Then you thresh them, and then you do the winnowing. So the way they answer this is, it must be you already did the drying. So you can be posek on a gadish, on a pile, if it's already been dried out, the grains. And then you're left with only two. But the winnowing, isn't that bidei shamayim? Which would answer what I said before. You can take a sieve and do it that way. And therefore, it's still considered, even though people don't usually do that, since you could potentially, it's considered in your control. It's in this basket with the grapes. Now, what has to happen still? We're going to see a whole bunch of things. They have to sit in that, in that basket, heat up, they get warm from being all together and warming up. Then you put them in the place where you trample on the grapes. Then then after you put them in there, that's already one action, bringing all the grapes to the wine press. Then you trample on them, and then leminga. Then you remove it. If you remember how you've been right in Israel, they have all these wine presses in all different places. It's great to go into. You live in this place, you understand much better how they work. There was a channel that led from the wine press into this bore, into this pit, and then you would take it out of the pit. That's also an action. These are all actions that you've done. So there's four. So how are you going to deal with that? You have to get rid of two. To which they answer, well, in Rabbi Chia's version of this Mishna, Kedetani Rabbi Chia, ala komer shel zaitim, on the olives, he said it was in the komer, which we'll see is after they're warmed, because the olives have the same process, after they were warmed, they go into the komer. So just like there, hachanami ala komer shel anavi. We're talking about a pile of grapes that's already gone through the warming process. With that, we've gotten rid of one. We still have three. It didn't help us enough. We need to get down to two. Now we're going to answer, we got rid of the first one because we're going to say you already did that process. Now we're going to get rid of the last one because we're going to say it's a place where when you sell the wine, the people who buy it go and take it out of the pit themselves. The buyer does that, not the seller, in which case the seller is only missing two actions, the two middle ones. Okay, same thing with the matan shel zaitim. We're going to do the heating, that it warms up on its own. Putting it in the olive press, lemeidash, crushing them, ulamingad, and then removing them from the pit. Tani Rabbi Chia, ala komer shel zaitim. So again, we go back to Rabbi Chia. What do you mean? He said it's the komer. It's already one process. Later, but there's still three. Okay, again, it's a place where the Mishna was relating to a place where the custom was, whoever buys it takes it out of the pit. You're missing turning it into a pot, taking the chunk of clay, making it into a pot, ibushe, drying it, iyule latuna, putting it in the furnace, the misraf, burning it, and the mepat, then taking it out. That's 5 processes. We're going to have to get rid of a whole bunch here if it's going to work. Well, again, we're talking about the bitzim shel yotzir that were already turned. It's a little weird. That's not what it says in the Mishna, but it sounds like it's clumps. Well, you already shaped them and they dried already. You still have 3 left. Again, we're going to take off the last one. The one who buys it takes it out of the furnace. Remember, you take these stones, limestones, and you put them in, once you sink them into the furnace. So now they say, should have actually probably, the previous one is more a kiln. This is more a furnace. But they're missing still the burning process. And as you've stuck them in the bottom of the furnace, you've sunken them in, but they still need to be burned. They still need to be removed. And then there's another process, which is you need to crush them. You take the stones that were heated up, and now you crush them and make them into a powder. And that's your lime. So, right, your limestone. So how do we get rid of the last one? We say, it's the place where the one who buys it is the one who crushes it up into powder. You could even do an earlier stage. According to Shmuel, it could be 100 processes. You could just say taking the stones would be enough. So you don't have to actually put it in the furnace. So that doesn't make any sense. To which they say, according to Shmuel, you should read it as once they're ready to go in the kivshan, meaning you have the stones in hand. Okay, that was a whole question of fitting Rav and Shmuel into the words of the Mishna. Now we're going to go to this bitzim shel yotzer, and we're going to see that there's actually a machloket tanaim about this, even though the Mishna said you have these clumps and that's enough. So tana Rabbanit, ein poskim ala bitzim shel yotzer ad sheyasu, divrei Rabbi Meir. That's our Mishna. You have to have the clumps ready, and that's Rabbi Meir. Amar Rabbi Yossi, b'ameh dvarim amurim ba'afar lavan. This is in white soil, I guess, that you turn into this clay, because it's not so common to find. Aval, afar shachor, if it's black, kigon kfar chanani v'chavrotea, kfar shichin v'chavrotea, like in the villages of Hanania and Shichin and the surrounding areas, where it's very common to find this kind of soil that they were able to turn into clay. Again, the more common it is, what are we going to say? You don't have to have a stage where they're already in these clumps. All you have to do is get money for it up front without a problem, because you can easily find it. Anyone can go anywhere and buy it. So it's as if you have it because it's so easily able to be bought or found. So now we're going to have a story, and we're going to say this doesn't really match either opinion that we see in this Braita. He gave money from when the person had brought the afar into their house. Now, nobody said that. It was either you don't even need to have in your house because it's so easy to find, or you need to make it into clumps. But nobody says just bringing the soil into your house should work. So, Kiman, according to who did Amemar go? Rabbi Meir Hamar Chiasu. Right, we're obviously talking about this black soil. So if it's Rabbi Meir, he said you have to make the clumps. And if it's Rabbi Yossi, Hamar Alpha Pishain Lezeh Yesh Lezeh, you don't even need to bring it into your house because it's so easily found. To which the answer, La'olam ki Rabbi Yossi, really holds like Rabbi Yossi, but what was the issue? Well, it all depends on where you lived. Uba Atre de Amemar Ashik Afra. In the place of Amemar, now you have to remember, the rabbis were in Israel, Amemar is in Babylonia, and obviously it's not all the same. In the place of Amemar, it was very hard to find the black soil. So Rabbi Yossi, who says you don't have to have it because you could go buy it anywhere, would basically say, he certainly doesn't think you need to make it into a clump. You don't even need to have it in your house. But if it's uncommon and it's hard to find, then you have to have yesh, though. It has to be in your house. But he doesn't care if it's a raw material and it's not even made into a clump of clay yet. So that's why this must match Rabbi Yossi, and it was hard to find. And therefore, now, here we have to get into, again, this goes back to all we were talking about, asmachta and all that. If I buy this soil from you, I want to buy a pot, and I know that this kind of pot is very hard to find the materials for in the place of Amemar. When I give you the money up front, and you don't have in your house, I'm not really, so actually let's do the opposite. If you have in your house already, because that's the first one they say, if you brought the afar into your house already, and then I gave you the money up front to make me the pots, well then obviously I intended it seriously, right? Which means, number one, I can't change my mind about it because I clearly intended it. And then I can lock in at this price because it's yeshla. But lo samchadate. But if not, if you don't have, and I know what I'm buying from you is very rare, and you might not ever find it, then when I give them money, I wasn't giving it wholeheartedly like this is yours and I'm never going to change my mind, because I know that there's, 25% chance that I'll get it, 75% chance that you're never going to find this. So if you haven't brought it into your house, it's not a done deal at all. And if it's not a done deal also, then it's going to be a problem of ein lo, basically. So you have two issues. Number one, one issue relates to can you change your mind about it, which we were talking about earlier today. And number two, is it considered that yeshlo? And obviously is not considered yeshlo. And then again, we did manage to fit it in with Rabbi Yossi. Now, you might have noticed, you might not have noticed this, but if we go back to the Mishna says, so all these items you have to have, but not the zevel, the manure, you don't have to have, because the manure is just easy to find. That was tana kamma. Tana kamma said, we'll read it inside, I'm back on the Mishna, I ain't bet him a bet. All year long, you could always find manure, okay, which they use for fertilizer. So now we have a machloket though, because Rabbi Yossi says, you have to have manure in your garbage dump. If you don't have manure, it's not, okay? It's not, we don't call it so easily accessible. And then the chachamim matirim, the rabbis permit. So something strange about the structure here, because we have Tana kamma who says it's okay all year long. We have Rabbi Yossi who says it's not, you have to have it. And then we have the rabbis say it is okay. So Gemara asks, it sounds like there's three opinions, but there's really only two. Because the second opinion holds like the first opinion, and then why did they need to bother saying chachamim matirim? We already know. Kamma said you could do it. You don't need to tell us, and the rabbis permit. Obviously, they permit if Rabbi Yossi is the only one who says no. So the answer, I'm a rabba, turning out I'm a bet. There's a debate about the winter days. In the winter, what would happen is they would put out the manure and leave it to dry and get trampled and like get processed sort of. And in the winter, they would kind of leave it out. And in the summer, it would dry and it would be ready for use. So the debate between them is in the winter months, because in the winter months, it's not really ready yet. So with the first opinion, Tana kamma says, all Yemot HaShana, it's as if you have it readily accessible. That's fine with Tana kamma. It doesn't need to be fully ready. According to Rabbi Yossi, you have to, and again, Tana kamma is saying you don't even need to have it because it's so easy to find, even if you could find it not fully ready, but you can find it getting ready, that's enough. Rabbi Yossi says, no, you actually have to have it in your house. And the Chachamim who say, no, you don't have to have it in your house, but they say, but only in the summer do we consider, even though you don't have it in your house, you can go get it anywhere, because in the winter, it's not a finished product yet. So if you don't have it in your house, we can't just say, oh, you can go easily buy it anywhere, because everyone's just preparing their fertilizer, their manure for fertilizer. It's not yet ready. So we have three opinions there. And the main debate between two of them is about the winter months. Okay, now we get to the two more complicated sugiyot for today. Posekimo kishara gavor. This was the Mishna had talked about. You remember, the Mishna had said, if this is all we've been talking about, if I pay up front and then the price goes up, is it rebate? But now we have a separate problem. Remember, we were just been talking about this. Is it rebate? What about also changing your mind about it? Can you change your mind? So now we're going to focus on the changing the mind aspect, which is, can you renege on the deal? If the price goes down, I paid you up front, which again, I'm paying you up front for my benefit. What if it gets worse for me because the price eventually goes down? So instead of getting 10 kilos of wheat, I'm now going to get, okay, you agreed to give me 10 kilos of wheat. Now, you give me those 10 kilos of wheat, but now the money I gave you way back when could buy 15 kilos of wheat. So why should I settle for 10 if I can now get 15? I basically lose on the deal. So the Mishnah had a machlok. Tana kamma said, if I stipulated from the beginning that if the price goes down, you're going to have to give me according to the new price more. But if the price goes up, I went out, right? In other words, I want it both ways. But it's fair because I'm giving you money up front. So I should theoretically get it both ways, but only if I stipulated. Because remember, if the price goes up and 10 now costs a lot more than what I paid, I still want to get my 10. But if the price goes down, I don't want to lose out and I want to get 15. So according to Tana kamma, I can make that stipulation from the beginning. And if I don't, though, I'm stuck. I'm going to get the same whatever price I linked into. And even if it means I lose. Rabbi Yehuda said, no, it's an obvious part of the deal that I'm not planning to lose. I'm giving you money up front to gain or to at least keep stable at the same price. But if the price goes down and I would stand to lose by linking into that first price, I never meant that in the first place. And therefore, I can either say to you, give me the 15, or I'm taking my money back. And I can do that according to Rabbi Yehuda, but not according to Tana kamma. So now we're going to see a case. He was sent by his father-in-law. Right now, we think he's a shaliach. Later, we're going to get to a question about that and say maybe he wasn't a shaliach. But right now, we think the father-in-law sends the son-in-law, the future son-in-law, to go buy the jewelry for the dowry for the daughter, okay, for his future wife. But again, it's the father-in-law is sending it to buy for his daughter to bring into the marriage. And he gives him money, and the son-in-law gives money up front. They had the jewelry, otherwise, if they didn't have the jewelry on hand, it wouldn't have worked. But he said, I only need it before the wedding, so give it to me before the wedding. Well, date of the wedding comes up, and the price of jewelry goes down, and he can now get a lot more for his money. And the father-in-law says, don't come back to me with less. I sent you with $100. I want you to get $100 worth from today, not $100 worth what it was when you gave the money. So the son goes to the store owner and says, hey, give me more. And the store owner is unwilling. So, right, he's in a bit of a bind, doesn't want to get in trouble with his future father-in-law. On the other hand, he doesn't want to lose money and have to pay money on this. So onto the kamma Rav Papa. So he and the storekeeper go in front of Rav Papa. Amar le, Rav Papa says to the son-in-law, if you made the stipulation from the beginning, like the Mishna says, like Kamma says, then you get the price that it is now and you'll get the extra jewelry. Velo, and if not, shakel kamei kara. Well, then you get the first price. It's clear he didn't make the stipulation, so he's stuck. Amrulei Rabbanit Rav Papa. So the rabbis asked Rav Papa, Ilo pasak shakel kamei kara. If he didn't make an arrangement, he's stuck with that early price. Ma'od ninu, ma'od lo kanu. But wait a minute. Why can't he just renege on the deal? Take his money out, right? We learned the ma'oder and enam konot. Okay, this is just a review of things we've seen before. Money, right? Remember we learned talif konet dinar zahav enam konat talif. You put money down, it doesn't mean that it's acquired. So if the son-in-law put the money down, there's no king and he can just get his money back. Amar lahu ana nami lekibule ale misha parakami. I wasn't saying by Torah law he can't get his money back. He can, but if he does, he reneges on a deal, and reneging on a deal gets cursed by a misha para. In other words, this is rabbinically forbidden. The rabbis will say this is no good, you can't renege on the deal, but really by Torah law you could. So now he's gonna say the following, okay? Here he explains. He says there's a misha para for both sides, okay? Meaning, depending on what happened to the price. Eat pasak, or what they said. If the stipulation, actually, it's not dependent on the price, it's dependent on what they stipulated. Basically, Rav Papa is saying, I'm not being partial to the store owner because it would have been the reverse if they had stipulated from the beginning. So if the stipulation had been made, okay, so if they had arranged and the son-in-law had said, listen, if the price goes down, you're going to give me more jewelry. And then at that point, the price really went down and the jeweler says, no way am I giving you the more jewelry like I promised. I never really thought that was going to happen. When did jewelry prices ever go down? I kind of really didn't mean what I said. Well then, right, and the mocher well then the mocher will get the curse of the misha para curse. And ilo pasat, if they didn't make the stipulation, and the lokach is kahadrabe, because obviously if they didn't make the stipulation, it's bad for the buyer, and the buyer changes his or her mind, then the buyer gets the misha para. So basically, Rav Papa says, that's the fact, okay? This is a deal. They made a deal. And yes, only money was passed, and that really doesn't make a kinyan, but it's enough to say a misha para. You should get cursed. Now Ravina says to Rav Papa, I'm missing something here. Amarle Ravina le Rav Papa. Now, I want to remind you, in the Mishna, there's a machloka between Tana kamma and Rabbi Yehuda. Now, if you might remember this, on Daf Mem Dalet, okay, it's a while ago already, on Daf Mem Dalet, there was a machloka between Tana kamma and Rabbi Shimon about whether ma'od or konot or not. And Rabbi Shimon said, ma'od or konot for the buyer. Because once the buyer puts down the money, they showed seriousness, and they can't change their mind. The mocher who received the money can change their mind, but the buyer can't change his mind. So now comes Ravina and suggests that maybe Tana kamma in our Mishna who argues to Rabbi Yehuda is Rabbi Shimon, who, by the way, argues with Rabbi Yehuda on a lot of things, like Davar Shena with Kafin and all those Shabbat Suddis, if you remember, and many other times. So basically, Ravina says to Rav Papa, now, if we make Tana kamma in our Mishna Rabbi Shimon, then we say the rabbis disagree. And the rabbis think, right, because Rabbi Shimon holds ma'od konot, in which case the buyer locks himself in. And that's why the buyer can't change his mind. But that's only Rabbi Shimon. And the rabbis disagree, and that's Rabbi Yehuda is the rabbi's position, which is the mainstream opinion, which means that we should hold like the rabbis and not like Rabbi Shimon. So why are you holding like Tana Kamma in the Mishna when maybe Tana Kamma in the Mishna is Rabbi Shimon? That's his basic claim, and let's read it inside. So Ravina says to Rav Papa, Rabbanit who depliga alei to Rabbi Shimon, ma'od lokanu. Why do you think that the rabbis, that the rabbi's opinion, the Tana Kamma in the Mishnah, is the rabbis who argue with Rabbi Shimon? And yet, even though they think money doesn't buy, which is exactly what Rav Papa said, it doesn't really make, it's not a real act of acquiring, but they'll get a mishapara, right? If this son-in-law reneges now, he'll get a mishapara. And therefore, again, depends on what happens, what happened in the beginning. Right? It's all dependent on what the stipulation was. If the buyer had stipulated from the beginning, then yes, the buyer can obviously renege because that was his stipulation. But if the son-in-law hadn't done that, then he's stuck with that original price. But why are you saying that? That was just a repeat of what Rav Papa said. Dilma, Rabbi Shimon, maybe Tana Kamma is Rabbi Shimon's opinion to Amar Ma'od Konot. Because that's why the lokach can't change his mind. Because Ma'od acquire for the buyer. And therefore, if the buyer had stipulated from the beginning, well, then that's okay, because that was part of the stipulation. He can insist on getting the larger amount of jewelry. But if not, shakel he has to take from the original by the original price. Mishum dekane luzuze, because for him, that money the buyer gave, the son-in-law gave, is a kinyan, and it's done. Aval, but the practical relevance of this being that if all that is Rabbi Shimon, the Tana Kamma from Mishna, l'Rabbanan, the rabbis who disagree would say, bein pasak, bein lo pasak, shakel ki hashta. And even though normally there's a mishapara for someone who reneges, in this case, no, of course that was the buyer's intent in the beginning. Didate the inish atarazila. That's he thought that the price was low now and that he was going to get a better rate. He didn't think the price was going to go lower. And therefore, again, this is just what we said before to explain Rabbi Yehuda, maybe that's the rabbi's opinion. Because my order not kono. And yes, if the price goes up, that was the whole intent. If the price goes down, the son-in-law, again, remember, the son-in-law is putting money up front. That's always good for the seller, not for the buyer. Why would he put himself out and put up the money up front if to lose? Never intended that. And therefore, why don't we just say, yes, you can renege on the deal without any sort of issue, according to the rabbis. So that's his question, to which Rav Papa answers, Amar le, imur de Amar Rabbi Shimon b'chad tara. When Rabbi Shimon says, and now we're going to kind of combine that sugya with this. When Rabbi Shimon said, when you put money down, it's a done deal, what he meant is, in a case where the rate stays the same, and that's, I agree to buy something from you, and then I change my mind. That I can't do. It's too late. I bought it. Torah level. I bought my item. But that's only if the item didn't change price. Because when I bought it, I intended to pay this amount. And then if I change my mind, well, it's too late. But if the price fluctuates, and again, normally, okay, some people say either it's when you bought it and you were planning to get the item 5 minutes later, and then you change your mind in 5 minutes. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a totally different case here, where you give the money 6 months up front or however much time up front with the intent to only get the item later, knowing that there'll be a price fluctuation. That's a whole different transaction. When I give you money in that transaction, it's not the same as I'm standing in your store and I give you money and 2 minutes later before I actually get the item, I decide, wait, I'm changing my mind. Okay? It's like a game, right? When you're playing a game and you finish it, you say, oh, it's your turn. And then you say, wait, I have something more to do. Now, right, at that point, maybe there's still a little time and you didn't really mean it. But no, in that case, it wouldn't actually be good. No, because like once you said it, you mean it. Okay, maybe that's not a good sound. But the point is, if I was expecting to get it right away, then when I put the money down, I'm obviously intending, I'm linking into this and I'm getting it right now. And it's too late to change your mind because you did an action. You can't say, I guess it's like saying, it's your turn. Like that's like an action. You already did it. But if you were intending to get something much later, then you understood that there might be price fluctuation and you weren't definitive about giving your money. It wasn't the same kind of action. So he says the following. So now Rav Papa says, when Rabbi Shimon said that ma'od konot by Torah law, as soon as you give that money, was only in that case where I knew what I was getting and it wasn't going to change. Or the price didn't change, even if it's 6 months later, but the price was the same. I can't now say, oh, over the past 6 months, I changed my mind. No, I linked into that price. That's the price. I get what I get. But betray Tari Miyamar. But he didn't say it if Rabbi Shimon doesn't think Ma'oder Konot if the price changed, because then the circumstances are different. Maybe then I really could change my mind. And which means what? Which means that you can't say the tana kamma in our Mishnah is Rabbi Shimon, because Rabbi Shimon would even agree in our Mishnah with the rabbis. And then you can't say, oh, this is a debate Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis, and tana kamma is Rabbi Shimon, and we really hold like the rabbis. No, there's no difference, Rabbi Shimon and rabbis in this case, and therefore tana kamma must be the mainstream opinion, and that's why I held on. So now we're going to have to see why he's convinced that Rabbi Shimon distinguishes between one and a change in the shar and not a change in the shar. And that's based on this Mishnah on Mem Dalet. So now they're going to say, Rabbi Papa says, if you don't think that Rabbi Shimon has this distinction, I'm going to prove it to you that he does. I'm going to prove it to you that when there's two sha'arim and the price changes, even Rabbi Shimon doesn't think that the buyer is stuck and linked, has to pay on a Torah level. How do I know this? Because Misha Parabba lokach Rabbi Shimon lately. Because if we don't say that, Rabbi Shimon will never have a case of a buyer who can do a Misha Para. Because every time we'll say the buyer put the money down, it's a done deal. Okay, well, maybe there is no Misha Para for a lokach. Why do we assume there is? Well, he's going to derive it from the words of the Mishnah there. It's really actually in the Mishnah. Even though Hatanya is a Braita. Mikom makom kach halacha, aval amru chachamim Misha Para. In any case, this is the halacha. Actually, I thought it was the words of the Mishnah, but maybe there's something different. Maybe, one second. And Dalet. Get my sign in with that. I think this is tough about. 1 second. Oh, I guess it's a Braita. Now I can't find it. Okay, not sure. Okay, either which way, it says here it's in a Braita. Mikomakom kach halacha. In any case, this is the halacha now. This was said on Zahav is not koneh talit. Okay, if you put money down, you don't acquire the talit. And that is the halacha, meaning the court can't enforce it. It is a Braita, thank you. Aval amru chachamim Misha Para. But the rabbis still said you can't renege on that. So here you have Rabbi Shimon saying, in any case, right, the ma'oder not konot, my mikomakom, lav de loshna lokach veloshna mocher. They assume mikomakom doesn't mean, because remember, Rabbi Shimon, the way we understood Rabbi Shimon in the first place was the buyer can change his mind, but not the seller. So now they're suggesting that because it says mikomakom in any case means either side reneging, even the buyer. So that would go against what we thought Rabbi Shimon said. So the only way to explain that, since this is said in the name of Rabbi Shimon, okay, they don't quote you that, but this is Rabbi Shimon Omer. Lav de loshna lokach loshna mocher mekabel la Misha Para. It sounds like anyone gets the Misha Para, which means there is a Misha Para even for the buyer. When could that possibly be? Only in one possible case. Elakika am Rabbi Shimon b'chad tara. It must be when Rabbi Shimon said his original thing, the lokach can't renege, is only in one shar. The price never changes. But betray tare lo armor. But in this case, in this Braita, it was talking about when the shar changes. And even then, Rabbi Shimon, in that case, Rabbi Shimon thinks there could be a mishpara. It's not by Torah law you can't renege, it's only by rabbinic law. Okay, that was the first question. The first big question was one question, which led to a second question. Then we get to Rav Acha to Rava, who asked Rav Ashi a question on Rav Papa. The first one was the rabbis asked Rav Papa himself, and the rabbinic question within that. To Rav Papa directly, Rav Papa answered. This is a question Rav Acha is asking to Rav Ashi about Rav Papa's psak. And he says there's a separate problem. The father-in-law sent the son-in-law to do a message, right, be his messenger, his agent. Now, we have a principle in shlichut that says the person who sends someone to do something and they end up doing something bad for them, because this is bad, he gave him $100 to buy jewelry, even though the price originally would have gotten him, let's say, 10 pieces of jewelry, now it could get him 12 pieces of jewelry. So it's bad for the sender, right, for the father-in-law, to get 10 pieces of jewelry instead of 12. So he could go back and cancel the shlichut, cancel the agency, and say, I sent you litikune v'lo liyivute, to fix things for me, not to make things worse for me, to lose my money. So we should be able to just cancel the shlichut. And then that would be easy. Because instead of basically Rav Papa saying the son-in-law is responsible to basically compensate and buy the extra jewelry with his own money because he messed it, right? Because he can't get it from the store owner. So why can't you just cancel the shlichut? Okay, there's different interpretations of what this is, but they basically have to reinterpret the case a little. That somehow the son-in-law was a merchant himself. He bought it and then sold it to, or kind of said, oh, if you give me money, I'll give you this. But that first there was the deal between him and the storekeeper, and after the father-in-law came into the picture. Something like that. There's different ways to explain it, but that somehow you have to say the case must have not been shlichut, because if it was shlichut, like we thought in the beginning, there's a different way out. Okay, new Mishnah. Sharecroppers. We're now going to learn there were two ways of doing sharecropping, but sharecroppers overall means I hire you to work in my field. You work in my field as a sharecropper. Let's just say we split the proceeds 50-50. You're going to do all the work, but it's my field. So we're going to split it 50-50. We could come up with any percentage. It doesn't really matter. And we're going to learn today that there could be a certain general agreement, and we could change it from what's generally done in our community. So I can, if you're a sharecropper on my field, I can loan you the grains to plant. I can't loan you grains to eat because that's se'ah b'se'ah. You can't loan grains and get grains back because maybe the grains will go up in price. We've seen this a number of times, unless, of course, you have in your house. That's not what we're talking about here. The Aris doesn't have his own grains. So I can loan you grains, and you can return the grains to me later. At the end of the season, you can return me the value of the grains that I gave you. And even if they now go up in value or anything else, and there's no rebate problem, we're going to have to figure out why. But not to eat, because that would be rebate, but just to plant in the field that you're working in my field. How do we know this? Well, now we're going to bring a chumrah of Rabban Gamliel, but say that he was just machmir, but really anyone could do it. Anyone is allowed to do this. Rabban Gamliel he would do this. B'yoker, he would do it when the price was high, and if the price went down, or or they were low price and the price went up. Either which way, no tell me him kasharazol. He always took the lower amount because he wanted to avoid rebate at all costs. But this wasn't really the law. He just wanted to be stringent. Okay. That just proved that really you could do this because Rabban Gamliel just did it as a chumrah. The real point that was important to us that it was cheap and then it went up in price and he would still get it back at the lower rate, not at the higher rate. But you really could get it back at the higher rate and it's not interest. So the problem here is going to be that we have a Braita that gives a bit of a different distinction, and the question is what's the difference between the Braita and the Mishna. But here the Braita, same thing, but here the Braita qualifies. That's when the sharecropper didn't go down yet to the field. But as soon as the sharecropper goes down to the field, it's already forbidden. So why did our Mishnah not make that distinction and set up that qualification? And the Braita did. To which they're going to answer, I'm a Rava, Rabbi Yehuda Esbaraniele. I heard from Rabbi Yehuda the following distinction, explanation. The Mishnah and the Braita were talking about places where they had different customs. Who brings the grains usually? Now, why is that important? So the first thing to understand is, if the owner provides the grains, or the Aris provides the grains. Those are two different things. Let's start with the Aris. The Aris provides the grains. If when we make a deal, you're going to get 50-50 of the land, but you have to bring the grains. And still, you're going to get 50 and I'm going to get 50. And you generally bring the grains. When does the job really start? When is it too late to change our minds? Not when you go down to the field, not when you start working and plowing, when you actually put the grains in. Because if you're supposed to provide the grains and then you, in the end, don't have grains to provide, you're not going to end up working for me. So I can always change my mind before you can get out of it and say, listen, I don't have grains. So the deal only starts, and we're going to see why this is important. It's all important when the deal started. The deal's only going to start when you plant. If I provide the grains, then as soon as you come start working, the deal has begun. Okay? That's number one thing to understand. So now let's see how that plays itself out and why that's relevant. The Atra de Tana Didan, our Mishnah, was in a place where the Aris gives the seeds. Now, in the end, what happened, though? I'm loaning you seeds, which means you don't have seeds, and I loan them to you. Now, if I loan them to you and I say I want them back, right? Now, Bein Yarad, Bein Lo Yarad, Kamma de Lo Yahi Bizra Masim Salikle. Since until you start planting, I could kick you off the land. Therefore, Kikanachit, when you went down and I said, listen, I'll provide you with the grains, you just have to give them back to me. Well, that's not a loan. That's all part of the arrangement, the business arrangement we have. We make if anything that's discussed before you actually start it's too late to renege, that's all part of a negotiation of a contract. So if I say, I'm going to give you the grains and you have to give them back to me at this price, right? We're locking in. That's just part of the negotiations. That's not viewed as a loan. We're going into a deal together. You're going to work. You're going to get 50%, but I'm going to give you grains and you're going to give me back the grains. That's part of our deal because you were supposed to provide the grains, but I said, I'll provide them, but you have to give them back to me. So that was all part of the arrangement. So that's why it says, you agreed to get less because you didn't have grains, so I gave you grains and you'll get them back. So you agreed to get less than a normal sharecropper would get. But the tana bara, mari arayav bizra. But in the Braita, I'm the one who normally, they lived in a place, whoever wrote it, lived in a place where the owner brought the seeds. Now, in this case, I'm saying I'm not willing to give you the seeds. I'm loaning them to you. You have to give them back to me. And that is all part of negotiating the contract if it's done before you started working. Because when does the job start? When you start working, when you start plowing, you go down to the field. So, ilo yarad, if you didn't, well then I could still, matzi misalik, I could kick you off the field. I could say, you didn't start yet. Nothing started yet. And therefore, it was all part of our negotiation. So I said, listen, I'm not providing the grains in this case. You're going to have to return them to me. And that was part of our deal. And then it wasn't a loan. But if you already went down to the field, it's too late for me. In other words, you already started working. And then I say, oh, by the way, I'm going to loan you the grains and you'll have to give them back to me. That's just a loan. And a loan can't be, say, I can't do it. So then it's a suit. Okay? And that won't work. So it really depends. Again, we keep seeing how much minhag makom plays in. It's fascinating because you'd think there's laws that define this, but really the laws are all dependent, which makes a lot of sense on what's customary in that place. And then we see how that affects the law. So we started with the case of the person who gets money from 3 people and then buys only one item, who does it belong to, depending on the situation. We talked about the situmta, this agreement, or putting a sold sign or maybe a handshake that's considered a kinyan, but really only to get a mishapara, right? That you can't change your mind. Then we went to this machlok of Rav and Shmuel, how many actions are needed to be considered yeshlo, even though you don't have the finished product, but you have the raw materials. 2, or as long as it's bidei adam, it's as many as you want, that's Shmuel. But bidei shamayim, it would be a problem even 1. We had to fix the Mishna to match all the different opinions and all the different cases in the Mishna. Mostly it was a problem for Rav. There was a little bit, there was a problem for Shmuel. Then we got to this machlok of Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yossi about the bitzim of Yotzer, and then we had a case of Amemar. We tried to fit it in. Who does it fit in with? Then we dealt with this Shara Gavoa and this psak of Rav Papa with the son-in-law. We had to figure out how does that work with the ma'ok konod or not konod, and maybe why is he machmir? Maybe it's really only Rabbi Shimon's opinion in the tama, but then we said no, it's not. Fits with everybody. Even Rabbi Shimon would agree. Rabbi Shimon would agree with the rabbis in that case because the chart changed. And then we had the loaning to the aris, the sharecropper chitin b'chitin. With that, we finished for today. We'll meet back up on Zoom in a week, and Shiurim will be up as usual. And looking forward to seeing some people, some learners in Manhattan this week. And wishing everybody a meaningful, a bit of complicated, happy week with both sadness and also celebration. May be meaningful for everybody, and maybe hear good news to come. Shavuot tov.